Yeah, this whole thing is like really self-sourcing, checking with ourself, really extracting that intelligence of like, what does my body want? Like this body is so different and I'm the only one that knows the answers for this exact body.
Yeah, and this exact body today.
Today. Yes,
right?
yes, yeah.
Because we are
Yeah.
changing. Like my soulmate postures pre-kids are very different than some of my soulmate postures now because my hips have literally changed. My pelvic structure has changed.
Yeah.
So stuff that used to feel good doesn't anymore. And I think, we're, as women, we're cycling.
Yeah.
No 2 days of the month are alike.
Can't be contained.
That's what I'm talking about. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so happy you're here.
I'm so excited to chat with you.
Dude. So as I was thinking like, okay, what is something that I know you're just like an embodied expert in? And you're an embodied expert in many things, but one of the things where you've really inspired me is birthing. like when I heard unassisted, unmedicated birth I'm like, who is this woman? Can you share a little bit about that? Because I think there's like this lost art of women trusting their bodies when it comes to many things, but birth is like one big example of that. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about your story there.
Definitely. Well, let's see. How do we begin? The scenario that ended up unfolding was that I really wanted to give birth at home, having this yoga, breathwork background.
Yeah.
I love Kundalini yoga. I mean, yoga is my life, so we'll talk more about that later. My husband was really uncomfortable with that. He really wanted me to give birth in a hospital.
Isn't it funny how opposites attract?
Yes, I know. And, of course, he had all the statistics and the reasons and so it made sense. But what ended up happening is, well, first we fought like hyenas. And then we decided kind of the compromise would be that I would hire a midwife. So I would get to, give birth or basically labor at home for as long as possible and get to do my appointments at home. Because that's the other thing I really liked about the midwifery model is that you don't have to go, have these quick provider appointments. You have more someone who's coming into your space and gets to know you better over a longer period of time, and then would go to the hospital just at the very last minute and bring her with us, kind of like a super doula.
I got you, yeah.
And what happened to me is, as a first-time mom, people tell you a lot of things. They tell you your first baby will never be early. Usually it's late. And they'll tell you that like the biggest faux pas is to go to the hospital too soon. So I had it in my head. I was like, I am not going to be the person who goes to the hospital too soon. Funnily enough, when my labor came on, I was able to really use a lot of Kundalini techniques to breathe through the contractions, the contraction expansions. Let's not forget they're expansions, not just contractions. Even all the language that's used around this is just.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. So
I just realized that.
Yeah, I know, right? So your cervix, there's a contraction happening in order for it to expand. This is what we call spanda in Sanskrit, right? It's the pulsation of life force, the contraction and expansion.
Wow.
So it's funny because we just call it a contraction, but what's actually happening is that the cervix is dilating and expanding.
I just got goosebumps from you sharing that. That is profound.
So really, we could just call them expansions instead of contractions. And that could be like a really positive reframe for a lot of people.
Rebrand this shit. Let's rebrand birthing.
So in my contraction expansions, I was able to, in Kundalini yoga, we do a lot of exercises where it's like you hold your arms out alongside your body or above your head for very long periods of time, and you're breathing through really intense sensations. So through the whole process, I just kept saying, this is a kriya. I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to breathe through whatever I'm feeling. And so even when it got really, really intense, I was able to stay with it.
What was the breath that you were doing? Like what kind of breath were you working as you were doing that?
Honestly, the contraction expansions are so big that it's just widening and deepening your breath as much as possible.
I see.
And then just being ready for the next one to come on. Like a lot of it's just how quickly can you calm yourself down after like a really big contraction and then start breathing in really big. Right? Because it's
that's
kind of like
life. Yeah, like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, how quickly can you get yourself down to a regulated nervous system for the next contraction to come? Because it's going to come.
Yes, 100%.
So
and I was just moving between my bathtub and my bathroom floor where I had some yoga blocks and stuff because the water and the heat and the sensation of the water was really helpful. So I was just kind of bouncing around between these two places. And it turns out that when I was like, okay, so this is really intense and there's probably going to be like 10 to 15 hours more of this. Like that's what I was mentally prepared for. And it turns out that by that time I was already in the peak of labor. So then it started getting really, really intense. And I remember I had one contraction that was so big. My husband was standing in the bathroom with me at this point. I grabbed his pants and pulled them down because I was screaming so hard. And I was just letting sound come out. That's another thing. I wasn't ashamed, or like I was just being very vocal. And then I told him after that huge one, I was like, something's coming out of me.
Yeah.
Like those were my words.
And hopefully it's a child.
As a child, like right then I was like something. And so he's like, I think we should call the midwife. I think we should have called her earlier. So like we speed dial her. She's like in her car. Say I'm like driving to meditation class. She's like, hey guys, what's up? She has this like on her dashboard. And Jake, my husband, literally just like holds the phone under my vagina. And he's just like, this is what's happening. Like we think Brett's like in intense labor.
Yeah.
And she just goes from like chill to like total pro mode. She's like, you need to get Brett on all fours. The baby's coming. Jake, can you like put everything down? Like we prop up the phone on yoga blocks. Cause of course I brought like yoga blocks into my bathroom for this whole showdown. And I gave birth to my son like the next push. It was that fast.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. So the whole process was probably 3-4 hours, which is very, very fast. He was also 10 days early. So I think it was all those things that people had told me, like, it's not going to be early, it's going to be really painful. It's going to be really long. Don't go to the hospital too soon. So I just waited and waited and waited, assuming that I was an hour, like 2 of 20. And it turns out if you're, really, I think a lot of it's genetic. I think a lot of people do need medical intervention, like thank goodness for C-sections. I think women should really look at how their mother gave birth, because I do think there are a lot of commonalities. Like when I looked back through my line, like most of the women in my family give birth pretty quickly.
What's the belief system though that, because there's so much conditioning around birth, right? We see it in the movies, like the woman screaming in the car and like, oh my God, this is there's so much conditioning around how it's the worst thing ever and it's so painful. So what was the belief that you needed to believe to know that you actually didn't need anything else or anyone else?
Well, the body is so incredible. I mean, it gives you this flood of hormones after. I mean, it's taking care of you to be able to do the thing. Like, there's nothing your body wants more than survival and procreation. So it wants you to.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? So it wants you. That's why, like, yes, it's an intense experience, but you are flooded with hormones afterwards, especially if you go without additional medication, because those natural hormones give you really a high after the experience. And that was definitely how it felt for me. And otherwise, if it was that painful, women wouldn't have more children,
That's
right?
true.
Like you'd be scarred.
Yeah.
So literally, our bodies are brilliant. They're taking care of us. I do think, again, so many people need, and if you want to do like pain medication and get an epidural, like I'm totally for that. Like, I think what's beautiful is for you to make an empowered choice about what you want. And I think changing some of the language, I think also looking at birth as a beautiful rite of passage that we go through. I know back in ancient times, right, we used to have a lot of rites of passage. Like there'd be a party when you first started menstruating. Like young men would go out hunting.
It's crazy
and
that we've lost that.
There'd be all these rites and rituals, and you would have seen probably 20, 30 births by the time you gave birth yourself, because you'd be watching your sisters and your mom and everyone in your community, because all women attended births kind of together. So I think we have so much fear of it because we don't see it.
Right.
We're not familiar with it.
Yeah.
So that's why if you can watch a lot of videos of it, or just, attend a friend's birth, or just make it have
I've done
less
that
of
4
that
times.
scariness. You're going to be a pro. I'm like, not worried
I feel
about
like I was a doula in a past life, because I've been so obsessed with birthing and babies since I was so young. Like there was this show up in Canada called A Baby Story, where it was the worst show ever. Like it was not good, but I was obsessed with it. And it just like showed the story of the mom getting pregnant and going through pregnancy and having her baby. And I was just like obsessed. And then now my girlfriends that get pregnant, like a lot of them are like, hey, can you come to my birth? Can you like be there? And it's such an honor. It's the coolest thing ever. And there's something in me that's like, I've definitely done this before. Like, I feel like it's like a past life thing. But I'm excited. I love intense experiences. Like, put me in there. We'll see how I do.
Well, what's interesting that you noted about the birth process is that I think we just tend to give our power away with anything that's medical. And we see this throughout our culture. And I think something that I'm trying to re-educate people on, and you as well, is just taking charge of your own body and being a body
Yeah.
detective and tuning inward. And so even with yoga, we've really been taught that there are these like styles of yoga and that we have to practice a certain way. But really, there's a much more intuitive, personalized way to practice, just like there's a much more intuitive, like inward way to give birth. And I think for each woman really thinking about, where am I going to feel the safest? Am I going to feel the safest in a hospital? If so, your nervous system is going to be more regulated there. And that should be something to lean into.
Yeah.
Or you're going to feel safer at home. I knew that I was going to feel safer at home. As crazy as that might sound to like a different type of person listening to that, I just really didn't trust hospitals. My father had a lot of medical stuff, like, so it's so personal to each of us. But I think the underlying theme and why yoga, breathwork, all the things that we're talking about are having a renaissance right now is because people are really waking up and we're letting go of these rules. We're done outsourcing our yoga routine, our health, and we're starting to reclaim and get reinterested in how do we make things personal and work for us.
Let's double click into that in the realm of yoga. And I think a lot of people are like, either yoga's for me or yoga's totally not for me. Can you speak into that person who kind of is like, ooh, yoga, I don't know about that. And how do we begin to learn how to use this modality in a way that is suitable for our own body?
Well, most people that I talk to either think they're not flexible enough to do yoga. If I only had $1 for every time I heard that one. And they also tend to get really focused on the style of yoga. So they think a style of yoga is the solution to their problems.
I got you.
Right? So they'll be like, what style should I do? Like, should I do hatha or should I do yin or should I do vinyasa? Like, they get really focused on that. And what I'm trying to re-educate people with my book is to say, actually all styles of yoga are valuable because they all shift your energy in different ways. And each style could be valuable to you depending your personality type and the type of moment you're in. So when we dive a little deeper to the energetics behind these postures, something that might feel really good for me, Sam, and I'm sure you know this from the breathwork space too, like a certain breath or a certain pose or that could give you a migraine.
Totally.
Because we're built differently.
100%. So
So if someone's had a bad or negative yoga experience, I would say that's because you weren't practicing haute couture yoga. Like you weren't practicing
like
the yoga
that.
like customized,
That's
designed
right.
for you. You were kind of doing something off the rack in a group fitness class. And when we look at the history of yoga, it was never meant to be group fitness. And I'm happy to dive into that if you would like.
Let's go there. I love this point as it pertains to breath work, because there's some breath work where a certain system can do it and just feel so good. And then the next person, exact same breath, exact same pacing, exact same duration, can feel so anxious, right? Like for my system, I'm like, oh, this is like so good for me. But if I was to teach that to someone who has like quite high anxiety, that could actually be anxiety inducing. And they're like, I never want to do breath work again. So I love that we're touching on this, because it's like, choose your own adventure, and it's an invitation to actually get to know your own system, right? It's like, my system is like fiery, and I'm like, I love things that like, I'm excited to give birth, right? I love things that I love jumping out of airplanes. I love just doing shit that makes me feel like I'm gonna die, Like, that is so exciting for my system, and I don't go into any sort of trauma response, but we could very well go into a trauma response with the wrong type of breath work. And so, yoga is a similar thing. So let's go back to the origin. It's so crazy that you said yoga should not, or wasn't designed to be group fitness. Because in my mind, I'm like I know because I've studied it, but like when we look at our society, I'm like, that's kind of all it is right now. So let's dive into that one.
So there's a lot we can dive into here. Let's start big picture first. So yoga was always meant to operate inside the context of its sister science, Ayurveda. So I see Ayurveda, which translates to life sciences. It's basically a galaxy of healing modalities that basically has nutrition. It helps your body work with the seasons, but it's all about personalization. So personalizing your diet based on what they call kind of your elemental makeup, which in Sanskrit is called the doshas.
Yeah.
So this it might be similar to some folks who know like traditional Chinese medicine. So in Ayurveda, you can be predominantly earth, air, or fire. And this helps explain.
I know. Can you take a guess?
Stumper. Right? So you're fire dominant. I also have very high fire. So when we look at this, this starts to help explain why some poses would be beneficial for someone who has high fire, and some people would make that fire worse. When we look at the etymology of this word dosha, and dosha means these different elements that exist within each of us, it literally translates to mean fault line or that which can cause problems. Why? Because most of us are attracted to what we don't need. Like attracts like.
I see.
So in the book, I talk about how the yoga I was initially attracted to as a high fire person was Bikram hot yoga.
Yeah.
Because it just felt familiar. It felt normal for me to push myself that hard, but it wasn't actually the kind of yoga that was going to bring me into balance,
I see.
right? So whatever that dominant element you have is the one that's most likely to skew out of balance and cause problems. So that makes the way we need to approach our yoga practice much more nuanced, and we need just a little bit of education, which is what I'm giving people in the book. But you need to start to cultivate the opposite a little bit and differentiate what you want from what you actually need.
I see.
And I'm happy to dive into the group fitness piece as well. Do you want to go there?
Yeah, let's go there.
Okay. So first of all, if we go way back in the timeline, yoga was always designed for two types of people. The young equivalent of like priest boys who were entering monastic life. So they were going to have a sole focus on rites, rituals, leading ceremonies, and basically they were basically monks. They had nothing to do except focus on the 8 limbs as outlined in the Yoga Sutras. And then also the elderly men. So in the Vedic life stages, once you were a grandpa and gave back to your community, you would go into the woods, renounce all your possessions, be a wandering nomad, beg for alms, do yoga and meditation as a way to prepare for leaving this physical body.
I see.
And prepare for the next life.
So it was only for men.
Because they believed in reincarnation. Yes.
Wild.
Yes. Both of these two groups, young boys and elderly men.
Interesting. Okay.
Yoga at this time was about transcending the body. The body was actually seen as an obstacle to overcome. So this is why we see depictions of yogis fasting, sitting on a bed of nails, sitting in caves even though it's freezing cold, right? The whole idea was like the pesky body with all its, urges for food and sex and all these things. We want to transcend that because yoga was about the next life. It was about otherworldly enlightenment. Yoga was not about the well-being of the physical body. So when did all of this change? When did it pivot? And the answer that my research for the book led me to was that everything really began to change around the Industrial Revolution. So this is, 1870s, 1880s. We moved from farms into factories. And as life became more sedentary and we didn't have to walk like miles to get food or see other people, whatever, people started to get more interested in their physical health and well-being, and formerly really niche activities like calisthenics or gymnastics started to become more mainstream. Like people started to get interested in physical fitness. And one man in India around this time, we can kind of call him the father of modern yoga. His name is Krishnamacharya. He did a pivot, like talk about a brand pivot. Rebrand moment. He was invited by the Maharaj of Mysore at the time to open a yoga studio, kind of like the prototype of what we have. It's called an akhara, like a gymnasium type space for yoga and meditation. And he noticed that he was having a hard time recruiting young people to join this endeavor because young people really saw yoga as something for like the priestly and the elderly.
Right.
And yoga always had some postures. We see those in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is one of the few texts we have that actually shows yoga poses. And Sam, there aren't very many. It's like 20, 30. Okay, it's not a lot of poses. Everything else written ever about yoga was more the philosophy and the transcending the body. So what he did is he said, you know what? Why don't we take some of the hatha yoga poses and intermix them with the kind of calisthenics movement that's sweeping Europe? Why don't we also intermix it with elements from Indian martial arts and dance? So chaturanga, which many people may recognize if they've ever done a vinyasa style class, that's the push-up. That comes from Indian martial arts. Like that's how that got kind of added.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and a lot of those types of more challenging movements. And so he ended up repositioning yoga to be for the health and well-being of the body. And in doing so, he made it accessible to everyone. And all of a sudden, young people started flocking to his yoga center in Mysore because they were able to do this really physically rigorous practice much more than before. Now, in Mysore, the way that yoga was transmitted is he would have everyone practice what was appropriate to them. So for example, and there's some Mysore yoga studios that exist today. Have you ever gone to one?
No, I haven't even heard of that.
So it's hard to find, but occasionally you do find them. And what's different about it is that everyone goes, but the teacher only gives like new poses to each person as they're ready.
Oh, interesting.
So basically, like if we were all in a Mysore class, each of us would be doing the traditional warm-up, some sun salutations, and then he'd go around to each individual and give them some tips. So it's like we're all practicing in silence together, our own thing.
That's really cool.
And then he'd give each of us some tips, and then he'd be like, you know what, Sam, I think you're ready to learn the next couple postures or the next couple things in these series, and he'd give them to you as you were ready. So I want you and people listening to think about how different that is than the yoga we've experienced. It came west. It got divorced from Ayurveda. Like some people listening may know what Ayurveda is, but basically yoga got taken out of the context of Ayurveda because even in Mysore, they'd be like, are you an earth dominant person? Are you a fire dominant person? Like you'd probably focus on different things and breathing techniques and poses, right? So it got divorced from Ayurveda. I call them the long lost twins, right? I'm trying to like reintegrate that, right? So, and then on top of that, it got enmeshed with the group fitness movement that was sweeping America in the 70s and 80s, like the Jane Fonda movement.
Yes.
And just for ease of transmission, all of a sudden, it was just like everyone's supposed to be doing the same poses, the same way, on the same breath cadence. And when you look at what we've dissected and kind of I pull this all out in the book, like literally that is insane.
Yeah.
Because first of all, you and I probably shouldn't be doing the same postures. The same ones that might be soulmate postures for you are going to be uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
We all have different anatomy. We all have different skeletons that are going to make our range of motion, like what we can actually physically get into, either beneficial or detrimental. We all have a different elemental makeup, which means we should be focusing on different things. And then some people, you know, it makes more sense to move slowly as opposed to quickly.
How do we get to know this? Like, how do we figure out like, okay, what do I do?
Quizzes. I wrote like Cosmo style quizzes.
Really? Okay, amazing.
So when I was a young girl, I used to go to summer camp, and one of my favorite things was
I love summer camp.
Do you remember like 17 magazine and like doing those quizzes?
100%.
Yeah, right. It's like, I don't remember what they were for. It was like, what kind of.
Our wedding is summer camp just because I love summer camp so much. Just like summer camp theme.
I actually knew that. So in the book, I was like, I just want people to create a personal practice where they pick out the poses and breath work for them that matches their personality. And we're going to do it through quizzes.
I love
because,
it.
Of course, I give a lot of context and background. So you can, you know, make a lot of interesting choices.
Yeah.
But if you're just not sure, every chapter has a quiz that's going to guide you towards your soulmate pose.
Is that
and
what you call
breathwork.
it? Soulmate pose?
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
That's so good.
Yes, because this is another big misconception. I think people think they need to be doing all the poses. It's kind of like Pokemon, like collect all the poses, like advance. And what I'm saying is less is more. Actually, you only need like 8 to 10 soulmate poses and really just even 15 minutes to really have a huge shift in your energy. Like this is the paradigm shift. Like if you're doing poses and breath work that are tailored to your personality, a 20-minute practice is more potent than like a 90-minute generic group thing.
So then it kind of changes the outcome. So for me, I can remember being in high school and I would go to that 6 a.m. Bikram class like 4 times a week. But I did it because it was when I had like body image issues and I was like addicted to fitness. And so the outcome for yoga in that time of my life was to lose weight. So what you're suggesting then is yoga is actually not so much a practice where we need to shift the physicality and the aesthetics of our body, but it is for more of the mental, emotional, and energetic.
It's here to nourish you.
I got you.
Right. And if we take that reframe, instead of your yoga practice feeling like another to-do on your to-do list, you're like, I always imagine myself as like an apothecarian. Have you gone to those like apothecary, like where they make fancy drinks for you with all this?
Yes.
Like, so I'm like the yoga apothecarian. So I'm like, okay, I know that I'm high fire, but I happen to be in a day where I need to present. So I actually do need some energy. oops, my kid had a tantrum, so I actually only have 10 minutes to practice. To me, an advanced yoga practice is being that apothecarian where you can mix and match the styles, the postures that are going to be an antidote to the type of day you're living in. Like this is the yoga we actually need in the modern world.
Versus it having to be so militant of this is what it is. It's an hour or 90 minutes. It's a Bikram class. It's this. Yeah.
So the last chapter in the book, we create together your 20-minute personalized routine, but it's modular, Sam. So it's like, if you don't have time for 20 minutes, I show you, like, there's like a prioritization framework, literally, where it's like, if you're this type, like if you're this element and this type of day, like just do this, right? So you could do something 5 minutes. And then I show you like how you could expand it or contract it. So like, oh, you have 90 minutes? Like, here's how you'd make your personalized 20-minute thing 90.
That's cool.
And then here's how you'd make it 10. Here's how you do it on your period. Here's how you do it when you're pregnant. Here's how you do it if you have the flu or you want to lose weight. There's a adaptation section at the end where I go through like all those common ways that you'd personalize for major life moments, like menopause or things like that.
Dude, that's so good. What do you feel in your own life? Like, what has been the biggest shift that practicing this type of yoga has created in your life?
A giant permission slip.
Tell me more. Tell me more.
Because what I write about in the introduction in chapter 1 was what I call my rock bottom year, which was where I gave birth to my son, which was beautiful, my first son. I lost my dad to cancer that same year.
Oh, babe.
So within a 12-month period, I had become a new mother, lost my father. I was his sole care provider. My parents are divorced. I don't have siblings. He never remarried. So it was like,
wow,
it was just him with me and my husband living with us. And that year, my business also really blew up. The online yoga teacher trainings were doing really well. So I was also scaling. It felt like everything at once. And I was showing up to my, huge yoga YouTube channel, like saying, everyone should practice every day, make it happen. And meanwhile, I felt like a fraud because in my new normal, I wasn't making it to the mat. I was literally felt like I was failing because I couldn't practice the way I used to. These longer, group classes. I couldn't go to studios. Even in my personal practice, I couldn't do 60 or 90 minutes like I did pre-kids, pre-business, pre-being a nurse. It just wasn't possible. And that's when I started to feel honestly really sad because yoga had been my lifeline up to that point. And I started really asking, could yoga help me in this period where I can't do the 8 limbs and the whole rigmarole that it's asking me to do. And that's when I turned to the history books. And I'll never forget that there was a day when I just threw out the whole routine and I just closed my eyes. I set a timer because I do that a lot because I only have so much time to practice. And I just did some of what I now call soulmate poses, the ones that enter me into a flow state, the ones that deepen my breath the fastest, the most efficiently, the ones that incorporate essential spinal movements. I kind of have like a criteria for like what these soulmate poses tend to have, and they're going to be a little different for each of us. But I remember just following that and then doing a breathing technique that I knew was really good for my energy and feeling incredible. And I looked at the timer and I hadn't even used all of my time. Like I had only used 15 minutes. And I was like, how is it possible that I feel this good in this short amount of time?
It is wild how quickly the energy can shift when we're intentional.
100%. Because before then, I was like doing a video, right? Like following along to a video, like one of mine or one of my teachers. And a lot of the indoctrination I had got was like, you can't alter these sequences. In Kundalini, you can't alter the Kriyas. That's not allowed. And then here I was in my personal practice intermixing Kundalini and yin and breathwork and really kind of going to the beat of my own drum. But like at night I was like,
choose your own adventure.
Are the Kundalini police going to like knock down my door? Like, am I going to get banned? Am I going to get in
arrest.
trouble? No, really. But I really thought that. And the thing that I've discovered the more and more I talk about this book and talk about the personalization framework is that so many other students feel like that.
100%.
They feel like they're not allowed to trust their own judgment when it comes to which breathing technique to use. They feel like they're going to get in trouble if they don't adhere to the sequence or the perfect alignment that the teacher says. Like there's so much fear. And so the one thing I'm really trying to do is just give people that giant permission slip of like, yoga can be integrated throughout your whole life. We haven't even talked about yoga habits because a lot of times you don't make it to the mat and then you need something else. And that's what those are. But that you are the expert on your own body and you don't, I mean, I'd love you to do online yoga teacher training with me, but you don't need to. Anyone who just knows a couple of these core principles in the book is really going to be empowered to be that apothecarian. And then your yoga practice is taking care of you and is totally modular and can fit into anything at any amount of time. And then it's like becomes this thing you crave.
Well, what's really interesting about everything we've talked about so far on this podcast, whether it's birthing, yoga, breathwork, it's truly this invitation and permission slip, like you shared, of how can we, yes, have mentorship and yes, have teachers, but also let our experience also play a part in the decision process, right? Of like, wait a second, my experience matters and how I receive this content matters and what I want matters, and really self-sourcing to find those answers to figure out like what actually feels best, and really letting felt sense be an indicator of what is really best for me. Does it expand me? Here we go back to expansion and contraction. Does it expand me? Does it feel like, yes, that feels so good? Or does it feel like, oh my God, that feels so contracting, right? Like for some people, you know, a certain type of breath work, they're like, no, absolutely no way. And for other people, they're like, that sounds great. I want to do that. And so, yeah, this whole thing is like really self-sourcing, checking with ourselves, really extracting that intelligence of like, what does my body want? Like this body is so different and I'm the only one that knows the answers for this exact body.
Yeah. And this exact body today.
Yes,
right?
yes. Yeah.
Because we are changing. Like my soulmate postures pre-kids are very different than some of my soulmate postures now because my hips have literally changed. My pelvic structure has changed.
Yeah.
So stuff that used to feel good doesn't anymore. And I think, you know, we're as women, we're cycling. No 2 days of the month are alike. So you're going to have different energy levels at different points in the month. That's why like this regimented, like one size fits all yoga is insane because every day is an equation of like our elemental blueprint, our, you know, the type of day we're living in, our schedule, the state of world affairs, how well we slept the night before. Like it's like 30 variables that are going into this equation. And then to be like, nope, okay, now you just have to practice still this rigid thing. It doesn't make sense. So we need to get a little bit of education. And then again, we can create and craft something that is so soothing for us. And it doesn't have to take a long time.
I was having this conversation with my Life Mastermind members last week. We were talking about morning routines. And they're like, Sam, what's the structure of your morning routine? And I was like, it's never the same, ever. You know, it's like sometimes my morning routine is just so simple. It's literally me lying on my mat with my hands on my heart and just being grateful for like half an hour. I'm not even meditating. I'm not doing breath work. I'm just like gratitude, visualization, gratitude. Sometimes if I'm feeling like I got a lot of energy, then I will, you know, journal and breath work and meditate and move and do all these things. But it's really about coming back to the self to be like, okay, what do you want? Rather than my mind overriding my body, like what does my body want? What's my intuition want? What is the perfect thing for me in this moment?
And in the book, I say that's the definition of an advanced practice, right? Because you're tuning inward.
Oh, that's good.
Like an advanced practice is an imperfect one that meets you in the imperfect moment you're in right now, right?
Yeah.
It's not this perfect thing because I think a lot of people think of advanced yoga practice is like the arm balances, right? And the handstands and like it's this linear graph of things we're achieving. I think an advanced practice is like how well are you adapting it to exactly what you're going through today? How well are you, you know, really looking within and just do a couple key checks and making it to the mat so that your practice meets you where you are.
What have you learned in yoga that you've adapted as a businesswoman? Because you are such a good entrepreneur. Like when we connect, I'm like, holy shit, Brett's so smart. Like you and I have we're a different quality of entrepreneur. And I learned so much from you every single time.
Same, girl.
Dude, like it's so cool. I'm like, tell me more about that. Like that's a whole other episode. But what have you learned in yoga that has made you a better entrepreneur and a better business person?
Well, one of the key frameworks I offer in this book is to be aware of your dominant dosha and then cultivate the opposite. So those of you who aren't following, like, you know, fire people, just to use that as an example, you know, our zone of genius is leadership and sharing our mission with the world and, you know, that inspiration. But if fire is out of balance, well, what does that become? That becomes impatience, right? That becomes frustration. That becomes bossy, you know, like there. So a lot of how this has been helpful for me, because all these principles that we use for the yoga personalization framework, I also teach you how to take them off the mat in the yoga
Yeah.
habits, because the mat is a microcosm for life. So a huge thing that I've realized is like, my fire is kind of a genius and that it helps me get stuff done really fast,
Yeah.
but it's also my Achilles heel because I'm very impatient and hard on myself. So having that awareness, and that's to me, again, what yoga really is. It's this level of awareness, right? It's having this awareness that I am not my thoughts and that I'm aware of my habitual tendencies. And so it's really taught me so much about how I need to cultivate patience, trust people more, trust my team more, trust the timeline more. So it all matches up. Like mat is microcosm for life. Like if you're
love that.
pushing yourself too hard on the mat, likely you're pushing yourself too hard in life. So it's
That's so interesting. Wherever you go, there
There
you
you
are.
are.
Yeah, it's been super interesting. What I've become so clear of in the last couple years is like how my business is just one gigantic personal development journey. It's like, how can you let it be that before anything else? And if you prioritize that to go every single challenge in my business, it's not about the funnel breaking. It's about what did it bring up in me.
it's about my response to the funnel breaking.
Totally. Because it's like, it's so interesting. The other day I was out for lunch by myself. I go to this like little shop down the road and there's a sandwich that I'm obsessed with. So I'll just like go there by myself and sit there and read. And there was my waiter and he was chatting to me and he was just so peaceful and so calm and so just grateful. And so I asked him, I was like, are you always like this? And he goes, yeah. And I go, why? And he goes, because no amount of stress or worry will fix anything. I was like, oh my God. And he goes, and if anything, it actually makes it worse. And I was like, dang.
Wow.
You got codes, bro.
Mic drop.
And since that moment, it was like one of those like such simple moments that were so defining. Anytime I feel activated, I remember him and I'm like, no amount of stress is going to make this better. In fact, when I feel the stress and I use yoga, breathwork, mindfulness, meditation, somatic healing to shift the activation of my body and come back to a place of power, I'm going to be so much more productive than reacting.
Yeah, I think we can view our business, our kids, all of these things are a spiritual practice. I mean, no one knows how to trigger us and get under our skin more than our own family, than our own children, than our partners. Everything that's happening in business often seems like it's just like dedicated to your expansion by making you extremely uncomfortable. So, in Kundalini yoga, we call the practice kriyas. And it's really, to me, it's like looking at everything in your life as a kriya.
Yeah.
Like this is asking me to look at my habitual response and grow in some way.
Dude, it's so interesting. It's so good. Something I say on this podcast all the time is energy has no walls. So how we are on the yoga mat is how we are in life. So I'm curious, you talked about yoga habits. And so when we can't find time to get to the mat and do the practice, even the 15-minute practice, how can we integrate yoga in our life as a way of being?
Well, I love this topic. There's 3 key ways that I give in the book, 3 key Sanskrit principles. So we can go into those. There's also so many ways that you can fit movement and breath work in that isn't a formal practice.
Yeah.
So a lot of the yoga habits I give are called like in-between yoga, which would be like just doing a half sun salute or a side bend while waiting for my kettle to boil for tea.
I see.
Or like an example of this that I've talked about before to just show how permissive I am with what yoga looks like and when I do it is like, first of all, I have yoga mats, super cheap ones. I don't like the fancy ones. Like,
really?
No, I just have like the
Tell me more about that.
$10 mats from Amazon.
Great.
I just have them stashed all over my house. So I have one in every room in my house. But often, so this anecdote might give a visual of like, my husband will be shaving, we'll be talking about weekend plans, and I will just roll out my mat and do cat-cow on the bathroom floor while we're talking. And that's just like a way to fit some essential spinal movement in.
Dude, I do that shit all the time. Eric's like, you are nuts.
Yes, but like, listen, people listening, if you're busy, this is better than nothing.
Yeah.
So I talk about how I stretch while I'm watching TV. I'm talking about one of my favorite places to do breath work is my car. When I pull into my garage, I'm kind of between worlds, right? Like
You and I have talked about this.
Yeah, and then we probably talked about it on my podcast, the power of the garage. You don't have to have a garage. The idea is that, you're looking for these in-between moments where you'd normally just rush through, be unconscious, or doom scroll on your phone.
Eric calls me. He's like, "Are you in the car?" I'm like, "Leave me alone. This is a spiritual practice."
Yeah, no, sometimes it's like, we know you're in the garage. Like, he's like, the kids know you're in the garage. Are you coming inside? And it's like, I'm just doing my pranayama and taking those little moments. So I think a lot of the yoga habits are in that vein, like just really fun ways that you can slip more movement, more breath work in. The 3 core principles of how to live your yoga off the mat are svadhyaya, tapas, and ishvari pranidhana. These are charged words, and the way that I choose to define them is controversial. So I'm ready for that.
Let's go.
In the book. Okay, so svadhyaya is traditionally translated as self-awareness, but I kind of call it in the book nourishing self-care, because what's the point of self-awareness if I'm not going to use that self-awareness to nourish myself in some way, right? Either by taking a deep breath or by doing something that would light me up or make me feel better or calm me down. So we need to take care of ourselves. I think especially women, especially those of us in caretaking roles, we put ourselves last. We've been fed the myth that if we're the good girl and we do all the things and complete the scavenger hunt and the checklist and get everything done, we'll get a gold star. And then we're allowed to deserve self-care and pleasure.
For sure.
And I know you were with me. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
That isn't true. We actually need to put ourselves, it's like the cliche of put your life vest on before the person next to you. So I talk a lot about svadhyaya and filling your own gas tank up, because yoga is the science of energy management. And it really says you need to focus on your energy first.
Yeah.
Tapas, the next principle, is often translated traditionally as heat. So we could refer to tapas as the heat you feel in a chair pose, which is that deep squat, right?
Dude, the chair pose triggers me.
It's not
whenever they
easy.
say chair pose, I'm like, oh, no, I don't like this one.
Well, that means there's medicine in it for
My
you,
inner
right?
child comes out. Yes, exactly. It's you're in my voice or you're in my head in yoga. I'm like, Brett would tell me that I gotta do this one. I don't like it.
So the thing about tapas, though, is it means so much more than that. It means so much more than just that heat. It's that intentional friction. It's that transformative alchemy. Right? It's your desire to evolve. And we know from Newton's laws, an object will stay in motion unless another force is exerted on it, which means you're going to become your mother and live all your same patterns over and over again unless you do something differently. And that's what tapas is. Tapas is when rubber meets the road. So one of the cheat phrases I use for tapas is cultivate the opposite. Do what feels uncomfortable, because that's how you're going to change. So if you're someone who's very frugal, like I used to be, tapas for you could be leaving a huge tip.
I got you. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In yoga, if you hate the chair pose, tapas for you could be I'm going to stay here for 5 breaths and send myself a lot of compassion. Right? So it's
I like that. It's intentional resistance.
Intentional friction.
Okay. I got it.
And by the way, if you're burnt out all the time, you're going to have no ability for intentional friction. That's why we need svadhyaya, self-care first. You see how that works?
I see.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So you need to do things differently. And then the last one is ishvari pranidhana. That is often translated to mean God. In some really traditional texts, it can be supreme surrender, let go. But the way I choose to translate it in the book is relinquish control. If we come back to yoga as the science of energy management, what these yogis were so good at doing was figuring out how to literally extend their life capacity by extending their breath, right? By taking as few breaths per minute as possible. They believed we only have a set number of breaths per lifetime, right? So they were trying to expand it, right? How to stay as calm as possible so they could have a lot of prana, right? And unfortunately, what most of us do is we give so much energy away trying to control things we can't control anyway. So much. What I want my kid to wear to school, the kind of career I want my husband to have, the weather I want, whether my flight is on time later. All of these things are not under my direct control. So when I practice ishvari pranidhana, relinquish control, it just reminds me that I need to just stay focused on myself and my own energy, and that there's so little we can actually control, which is humbling, which is why I think we all resist this concept and try to control what we can, because it's actually a terrifying thought that requires us to trust in a benevolent universe, which is why it makes sense that this word is also translated as God, because in order for you to relinquish control, you need to trust.
Let's double click into practicality in that one. There's so many of my listeners who are high achieving women who have massive dreams. And so the thought of surrender and release is like you said, terrifying.
Mhm.
So can you name the steps in the practice that you personally take in order to release control?
Yes. Here we go. Yoga habit, page 47. I'm not going to read, but I'll
Okay,
just paraphrase because
okay.
I really lay it out.
This is great. I love the way
It's like a how-to.
This is great. How to. I love this.
Yeah, how to relinquish control. Okay.
That's good.
Number 1, find your faith. It can be hard to believe that things will work out,
Yeah.
especially when your mental chatter is providing 10 examples of how it didn't.
Yeah.
Our brains tend to skew negative. We know this, right?
Yeah.
Our brains are really great at scanning for danger, or they like high contrast information because it wants to survive and then maybe procreate. It tends to focus on the negative instead of the positive. So we need to be aware of that. A student once told me, "No one ever helps me around the house." When she thought that, she got resentful and a bad mood would take over fast, like a storm raging in her mind. And so what I did is I asked her to pretend that she was in a court of law. And I said, prove to me, the jury, that the thought, "No one ever helps me around the house," is false.
Yeah.
And so she was able to come up with like a couple little anecdotes. She was like, well, my teenage daughter did help like take out the trash like 3 weeks ago. That other day my husband did help clean, whatever it was. And she was able to itemize and find some of the helpful things that people have done. And after proving to herself that there was some documented evidence that things were going her way, she was able to kind of approach her family with gratitude and faith and optimism instead of the desire to control.
I got
This
you.
is really important. Okay, let's just zoom out for a sec. You can have control or intimacy. You can't have both,
I love that
They're
so much. I love that
opposite.
so much. Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So finding your faith is huge. And then this ties into the second step, choose your focus wisely,
Yeah.
right? Choose your focus wisely. What you focus on increases. Is this like brainwashing yourself? Yes. But if you don't, the person who suffers is you.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That's the thing.
100%.
When a coach
Yeah.
really helped me get this, I
Yeah.
was like, oh,
Oh, wait
the
a
person
second.
who suffers is me.
It's just me.
Right. And then, really thinking about how everything is working out in your best interest. And there's a big pro tip I give here, which is that fear is beneath every desire to control. So let's just use a really
That's so
simple, like sexist example, because why not? Let's say I want my husband to do the dishes because I'm the one who always does them. I'm sure no one will relate to this. Okay, so it's fine. So basically, I could relinquish control by not doing the dishes. And probably that's going to bring up a lot of fear because now I'm living in a world where I don't know how the dishes are going to get done.
Yeah.
There's a lot of uncertainty. I don't know if he's going to do them. I don't know when he's going to do them. So all of a sudden, now we need a lot of nervous system capacity to deal with the uncertainty of the situation. Does that make sense? But yogis are great at this. Like that's what everything in the book and everything in yoga is designed to do, is to help you expand that nervous system capacity. And what I noticed is that it took a really long time for him to notice that there were a ton of dishes. Like it took way longer than I was comfortable with.
Yeah.
But I stayed with my breath, right? Watching them pile up, still don't know when they're going to get done.
Yeah.
And again, I had to relinquish control. What would be the alternative to this? Honey, can you do the dishes? Why haven't you done the dishes yet? I always do them. Can you do them? Right? That's control.
Right.
And I want intimacy. And you can't have both.
I love that
have
contrast.
To choose.
That's so good.
And what actually, in this little silly example, my husband eventually did do them. It took him a day and a half, like close to 2, to notice. Like it had to get very visibly like built up.
Yeah.
But then he did all of them. And then it was interesting for me because now it's like I have a choice. I can either is the discomfort of having the mess build up and not knowing exactly when it will happen, is that too much for my nervous system? In which case I could choose control and do it myself instead.
Yeah.
Or I can choose to wait and like focus on, like I have options now,
love this so
right?
much.
And here's the best part. And I give a lot of examples of this in the book. When he did do them, the way he loaded the dishwasher, and he put the forks like all together in the thing when he loaded it. Like I usually sort the silverware when I take it out, but he sorted it all when he put it in.
Oh.
I know, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And it was like this weird, so when you relinquish control,
That's actually so smart.
there are silver linings. there are silver linings of like incredible things that you learn. Like things often go better than expected, or you learn something totally new and interesting that you never would have learned before if you stayed with your rigid habitual pattern.
Right.
So this is why all these 3 skills work together. Self-care, cultivate the opposite. Cultivating the opposite was present too in that situation because usually I just do all the dishes the minute they, they get in my dishwasher fast. Like I'm very vicious about this. But I chose to cultivate the opposite and relinquish control.
That's powerful.
And then the whole time that I'm having anxiety, we're like, are they going to get done? Are they not going to get done? I'm practicing svadhyaya, self-care. Right? So all these skills work together.
I feel inspired to go home tonight after we have a dope ass dinner and write down all of the areas where I do feel a little bit of those threads of control and figure out like what do I need to cultivate in that area in order to have more intimacy.
And what's the
that
fear?
Feels exciting.
What's the fear beneath the need to control? Because if you can laser in on what's the fear beneath the need to control, you're really able to.
Where control comes up for me most presently right in this phase of my life is more so business. And the story I tell myself is like, well, I have to be in control because I'm responsible for 27 people's salaries and I'm responsible for all of these things. And then my ego kind of like hooks on the story. And then I have to be like, whoa. Pause, Sam. That's actually not true. So, it's there. I have enough self-awareness for it not to like override, but it is so interesting. But I love the antidote is intimacy. I've never heard that before in that way. That's so good and so true.
Yeah, you can have intimacy or you can have control. You can't have both. Like if I went for control, which was like the nagging, it's the way we're taught.
Yeah.
Right? To get what we want, whether it's in business or with our partner or with our kids, pick up, do this, right? Like, even with my kids, I try not to choose control. I mean, sometimes I choose control, like no fighting on the stairs. I'm choosing control. That's a dangerous situation. You can't fight on the stairs. But for other things, like
the 6-year-old fights with the 2.5-year-old
on the stairs.
That's unfair.
Actually, the 2.5-year-old like kicks his butt. He's like so much more like. Anyway, that's a whole nother story.
That's hilarious.
But for something like not fighting on the stairs, something like I'd love for him to clear his own placemat. Yeah. I could be like, clear your place. And again, that's what have been habituated to do. And instead, I'm like, well, I can have intimacy and control. I want control. I want intimacy with him. Control always takes away intimacy. He's not going to feel as connected to me. So instead of saying like, clean your place, I cultivate the opposite. So I'm like, and I trust Ishvara Pranidhana. So I'm going to say, I trust in my son's innate desire to help.
Oh.
So I start there.
Oh, I just got goosebumps.
Yeah. And then I say, sweetie, I would love this table all clean. Okay. And so do you see how even if you relinquish control only in your own mind, because I let go of like, if he clears the plate, it means he's a good kid and I'm a good mom. Yeah. Like all of that's gone now. I've relinquished control. I'm stating a pure desire. We talk a lot about desires, but I just stated a pure desire. And that's the key because pure desires don't have control. Sometimes if you're not good at this, they can be like have a lacing of control, right? Like so you have to be careful.
Yeah.
But when I do that, he is like so happy to do it. Right. So
I love
this is really, this to me is yoga. This is ninja mind yoga with these 3 key skills.
Dude, this is so good. I'm so excited for the whole world to get this book. It is so good. Yeah. Thank you for the advanced copy, by the way.
Oh, you're so welcome.
I'm so happy you sent that to me. Where can we get the book? You also have an amazing yoga teacher training. So give us a little insight where we can get in your world.
So the book is called Yoga Life because it's about integrating yoga into your daily life and personalizing it for you. And it's available everywhere books are sold. So Amazon or bookshop.org or anywhere you like to go get your books, you can go get it.
Yay! So exciting.
And yeah, I have 200-hour, 300-hour Kundalini, yoga teacher training. Yoga for Self-Mastery is my course that really dives into the 3 skills we talked about. And you can certify to become a teacher with me purely online, which is similar to some of your breathwork courses now.
Yeah. Upliftedyoga.com, is that the best place?
Yeah, or my name, brettlarkin.com.
Okay, cool.
BRETT, 2 T's, LARKIN.com.
We'll put the links in the show notes, you guys, so you can easily have access to Brett's World. You have an amazing YouTube channel as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Dude, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Flew by.
I know.
You have so much wisdom, and I love all of the frameworks and how you articulate them. It's just, I'm like, yes.
Well, I love you.
You're an amazing teacher. I love you too.
Well, I have so many of my yoga teacher training grads now who now want to do breathwork certification. So we're just like sending them all over to you. I know. It's a perfect synergy. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.